Hello, guys and gals. Today, I want to have a little chat about, I would have this chat regardless. The word of the day, or less the last many years, has been this idea of divisiveness. People talk a lot about divisiveness in the culture, how we're seeing more divisiveness. This is really a fundamental chat in life that I would have had 10 years ago. And sometimes too, when we talk about things like divisiveness and blah 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 blah, as many of you know, it's more that people are throwing things out more in the media, and a lot of it is because of our access to the internet and our digital worlds, that people can throw stuff out there, and we're just seeing what's been there the whole time. It's just coming out in sort of technicolor. And when things come out of the woods, they tend to sort of polarize. It creates more argument and extremes and things like this. So I want to talk a little bit about this human proclivity to create separations, and in some cases enemies. That's sort of an extreme version where you see somebody's an enemy, but sometimes it's not necessarily just an enemy. It's just somebody we could call the other guy, or the other, or the other person. And it's wired into our systems, and it's the fundamental core of all things racism, religious separation, to some degree, sexual discrimination that can go in both ways. I've seen plenty of men that just hate women for being women, and plenty of women who just hate men for being men. And we're not going to solve anything today in terms of, a lot of times we look for answers hoping to change other people. It's just unfortunately something we can't force people to change. We can only sort of enlighten ourselves and then just see where that takes us. But, we have a built-in quality of wanting to know, it comes from our survival instincts. Who's the ally? Who's the enemy? And, sometimes that comes for a very good reason. We recognize a danger is something that is somebody that's truly dangerous. But there's a laziness that this is what creates all of our worst problems with divisiveness and separation, is there's so many nuances to people, right? So if you could imagine two tribes of any, it doesn't matter. It could be American Indians, Central American Indians, African tribe, doesn't matter. And they don't live too far away. But within both of those tribes, there's going to have all these different personalities and nuances. Now, if you're in one tribe, and maybe there's some dangerous people in the other tribe, are you going to want to go through all the trouble of meeting everybody in the other tribe and trying to figure out who's the good ones and who's the bad ones, right? Some people are, the wise people are, the compassionate people are, but most people don't want to put the work in. They just want to go, those guys, they're all trouble. And that makes it easy. It just, that way we can move on. We know who we are and who the threat is. So there's a laziness that creates a lot of this. Things get so complicated when we start to look beneath the hood of any culture, and it faces us with the contradiction. That's the other thing. Life is full of contradictions, and the fabric of life is contradictions, and that drives us batty. It drives us crazy. The fact that, again, now we could talk about whatever. Middle Eastern people, African American people, and in any culture, there's amazing, beautiful, angelic people, and there's really screwed up, selfish people, and any white people, whatever, you pick your race. And it's troublesome to have to go through and make peace with the fact that, that's just the way it is. It's not that troublesome for wise people. It's not troublesome. It's like, because of course that's the way it is. But as humans, we often like to default. Unfortunately, the majority of people like to default to the easiest way to view things. And so it's so much easier just to find out and define an enemy. Racism, of course, is the easiest form of creating enemies because you can define an enemy without even knowing a thing about them. You can just look at the color of the skin. You can have an enemy from 300 feet away. You don't have to have a conversation. You don't have to do any research. Look, 300 feet away, your skin color is different than me. Enemy. I'm done. So that is, the laziest form to me, the laziest form of divisiveness is because it requires no work whatsoever. I would also call it the most primitive form of divisiveness because any sense of evolution we have requires on wanting to know what's underneath the hood to really understand what makes something tick. And the more primitive we are, the more we just look at the absolute surface of things, and that's all we look at. So we have that, and of course the other aspect is that aspect of things are making us feel special. And after we live in such a politically correct world now. We all have to sort of delicately dance, but there's some cultures out there that really specialize in this. Looking at people who maybe make a little bit less money than you do, or whatever it is, and then suddenly. We look at them, we divide ourselves not for any particular reason other way that makes us feel better about ourselves. Or that person is suddenly some scumbag, and then it makes us not have to look at the scumbag we are in the mirror as much, because they're more of a scumbag because of whatever it is, their background. And so there's also that pontificating that's sort of an ego thing. That happens a lot in religion too. You'll see that when we have religions that persecute other people for not being in their religion, there's that sort of club aspect. Now I'm in the club, you're not in the club. You see, automatically, no matter how screwed up I am or how much I'm struggling with my life, there's one thing that's sure, and that's I'm better than you, than your ass that's not in my club. And we see that, and many of you might think now that I'm, this sort of atheist that hates religions. I think there's it's all relative to how people interpret it and the quality of the ministers or whoever's running a given religion. There's some expressions of religion that are wonderful, and they're a tremendous gift to people and communities. So I never step all over religions. But, I think we can all acknowledge the aspects of religions when they go wrong, and that's a huge one. Probably the number one is when people say, I found God, and now I know that I'm better than somebody else that hasn't found God in the way that I found God. And that's a very common argument. One of the reasons why, Buddhism is such a huge part of my spiritual fabric, because it doesn't really have that. It's one of the few ways of looking at life that really doesn't require anybody else to be less. Somebody who doesn't believe in or follow a Buddhist path is not a lesser person than somebody who does. In the mind of at least in a sort of a Buddhist monk mind, it's just a path, just one path. So, I know there's a lot of preaching to the choir here thing, and we just have to be very, very careful too. I mean, in regards to this whole current, I talk to a lot of people, and there's a lot of smart people, and they see it's the game that this is. It's a little baiting game of seeing who wants to play the divisive game, right? And so people stand on the extremes, and they say, hey, you got to pick a side or the other, and if you don't, you're the enemy. Right, so now you've got this person who's the enemy of this person who's the enemy of this extreme. But then if you stand in the middle and you try to be intelligent about it, well, now you're the enemy of these two guys on the extremes. How dare you try to make some sense of this all, right? And then at that point, we're just in a head screw. You can't win. There's no winning in that game. There is no side. Even in the middle, you're screwed. And that's when you just have to shake our heads. And we just kind of go, well, let's see where this goes, and try not to live our lives in a state of fear. What I will also say is it's just amazing how many people fall prey to this divisive finding who is the other. And even people who pretend like they don't, people who aren't, I know a particular person I was hanging out with not long ago, not a racist, generally friendly to the people they met. Um, Somebody drove by in a fancy car and immediately they dropped the F-bomb, that effing rich piece of garbage, who do they think they are? Thank you. Now you're better than them because you don't have what they have. It's the same thing. It's like you never met this person. You have no idea who's in that car. No idea the quality of the person. You have no idea what they're going through. And but now you've found a way to make yourself better than them because you don't have much and they have a lot of stuff. So there's just a million ways that we can play this game with ourselves of making things better or worse than ourselves. And in the end, we can fool ourselves, but the universe doesn't care. And our higher self much prefers to see the fabric of life and the diversity that lies underneath the hood. To me, diversity is not in the color of things or the sex of things or the whatever it is. It's the next step. Diversity is not having some African Americans in the room and Hispanics in the room and Filipinos and Indians and Chinese. Diversity to me is all the diversity within an African American community, within a Chinese community, within a Filipino community. That's the diversity. It's recognizing that there's this flourishing human archetypes that run through everything, and all the same dramas and games that we play all show up in different ways and forms throughout all of us. And to me, that's the diversity. That's the story, and that's where I like to connect. So I know this is one of these conversations that you're usually preaching to the choir, that people either are like, oh, I feel the same way you do. But look at yourself and look at how you put your earpieces, your earbuds in so they don't fall out like mine do. But watch the subtleties of your divisiveness and watch what they're costing you. I had an old friend that I don't really spend much time with anymore. When I was younger, I spent a lot of time with this person, a very close friend. They once said to me, and maybe this is why I don't spend so much time with them, they once said to me, things are exactly as they appear. And as I got older, I noticed that this person lived in a very surface world, and that was with everything, and even with women, it was always looking at the surface and the body parts and all that stuff. And I found that, that was a half of a story. Things are not always the way that they appear. Things are often the way they appear, but often they're not the way they appear. And we're never going to get a deep sense of wisdom about life just looking at the surface of things. We can't deny the surface of things. The surface tells a lot of stories about things, telling people are sad or angry or whatever it is. But the subtleties are beneath the surface, all the subtleties of life. And that's a truly evolved wise person's looking for the subtleties as much or more as they are looking for the surface of things. And our divisiveness, our own, even if it's subtle, or desire to want to create somebody as the other, changes, it ruins it makes us lazy. It makes us lazy looking at the nuances of life. And, also hides our insecurities. This person I talked about who was judging the person in the fancy car, they were hiding their own insecurity about being comfortable that they didn't have much. If they love themselves and feel comfortable for being somebody who didn't have much, they wouldn't have an issue with the person in the fancy car. So that's us. That's our human story. And I guess I'll finish this thing off. Sometimes when I make these longer videos, I start to skip a little bit, fingers crossed. One thing to keep in mind is that the nature of human separation never ends. Meaning this. Let's take a look at some extreme, and I know these are kind of dark situations. Many times throughout history, we've seen certain people want to sort of annihilate another group of people. One of the things that comes to mind a lot is, obviously with the Jewish culture in World War II and the Nazis wanted to eradicate the Jews. I was like, these are the enemy. If we just get rid of them, it's all going to be good. And of course, the reality of the situation is if that ever would have occurred, it would have been another group of people onto the next group of people to annihilate, onto the next group of people. And then if they gotten rid of everybody but, pure Germans, it would have been a matter of time before they went through those people and said, okay, now who's the enemy within these people? So it never stops. You look at the surface of it, and you can look at this sort of very clear certain groups single out other groups. But it's kind of just an inherent issue that we'll always find somebody. So I had some friends from East India who had recently moved to the States, and they told me some of the harshest racism that they had felt was actually from other Indians who came from different parts of India who had moved here and could recognize by their skin color and mannerisms that they had come from another part of India, and they were incredibly rude and unkind to them. And I even heard this is a very legitimate story too. I had some friends from the Netherlands, and there's a large pockets of these sort of very conservative Dutch Christian reformist people there. And they described to me how there were these areas where people believed in these very, very slightly different versions of the Bible, and they wouldn't even talk to each other. They lived in separate zones, and they just really looked down on each other just for believing in a slightly different version of the Bible. And so I'm not here to badmouth any of these people. What I'm getting at is that we will find a way. People find a way to separate each other. And if the world was all black or all white or all Hispanic or all whatever it is, I guarantee you we would still find a way to discriminate and separate each other, because it adds to the drama of life. It adds to that sense of being more important than somebody else, of having an enemy. If our lives are hard, looking at somebody else and having somebody to blame or whatever it is, those are the fuels for that. So it's a never-ending game. And the truth is, like so many of the harshest things in life that we see, the human challenges, we're never going to get rid of them, but we can manage them. And, we can choose whether or not we want to be a part of them. And we can choose whether or not we want those things to own our intelligence and our point of view. But at the same time, we're always going to be in a world with a certain degree of people who are looking for who is the other, who is the enemy, who am I better than, or who is to blame, or who is whatever. And at that point, when we recognize that, the color, the religion, the sex, the whatever it is, that's just all just filling in the blanks. Let me just put something in the box, and I've taken care of that. So for those of you who choose not to see life that way, I commend you. The current of life is always, when things get more challenging, right? When we have a roof over our head, we have food on the table, when we have things to be grateful for, you'll notice that those things they're always there, but they subside. They subside dramatically. The more competitive, the more we struggle, the more people are struggling to get by, suddenly you'll see that start to surface. Because why? Who do we blame? Who do we blame for things getting harder and harder and harder? Who's the enemy? Who's the one responsible for that? And it's just historic that, when life gets more challenging, when we feel more stressed, those things always amplify. And they were always there. And it's just something that if we're a wise and intelligent and grounded person, we just have to stay centered and manage that stuff and go, of course, this is what happens when things get more challenging, more stressful, and people are more concerned about the future and where the future is going. These are, it's like when you start to get sick and, you get whatever, and you get a sore throat or rashes and things start to happen to tell your body telling you that something's going down. these are one of those signs that we're going through, we're purging, we're working through things in life. And we have to try to be the remedy, even if, the part of the immune system that's trying to work, even if the stuff that's coming out is not kind of ugly and sightly and not looking like it wants to go, it doesn't mean we can't stop trying to represent the counterforce of that lack of wisdom and desire to see the nuance. I think we've gone there, and that's it on the earbud. And we'll chat again. And I thank you for listening to this chat again. I know so many of these types of things we're preaching to the choir, but in life so much we're just often trying to find the familiar voices and to find our crew and our communities that we hang out with, so that when we see people, we understand, we think the same way, we see life the same way, or we want to see life the same way. And one of the reasons why I'm building this whole teaching practice in the site is to have another place where people find community and common states of mind. And there you have it. And in the meantime, I've said it once, I've said it 100 times, love, strength, and wisdom to you.